Hello there and welcome along to another Flipchart Friday video. It's David Duffett here at Let the Geek Speak HQ. It is a Friday. I do have a flipchart and therefore we're ready to go. Now, as you can see, because I know you're very perceptive, we're going to be talking about SMART objectives for your presentation today. They're not always needed, but a lot of times they are, and so we're going to go through them. But before I do that, I just want to give some overall context. In the Geek Speaker System, protocol number 1 is purpose, because it's so important that before you do anything about your presentation, in terms of constructing it, in terms of thinking about the learning styles of your audience, in terms of practicing it, in terms of putting slides together if you're going to be using slides, before you do any of that stuff, you should really spend a few minutes and sit back and think about the overall purpose of your presentation. Now, it could be that it's good enough to define that in just an overall aim. An aim for your presentation. And remember, the reason you're doing this is not just to straighten it out in your own mind, it's also so that you can transmit that and agree it with the sponsor of your presentation. That's the person that asked you to do it in the first place. If there is one, maybe it's your boss, maybe it's a conference organizer, maybe it's a customer, whatever. But being able to circulate your proposed aim and, if relevant, these objectives is a key thing to do, not only to the sponsor but ideally to your audience as well before the presentation. So if you do have access to the audience via email or whatever, then circulate your aim and objectives to get them agreed upon. Let them comment and go round in a loop until everybody is agreed. All three of you are agreed. That's you, the presenter, the sponsor, and your audience. Now, if you can't have that level of access to your audience ahead of the presentation, then agree them with your sponsor, if there is one, and then when you come out at the beginning of your presentation, on your agenda slide, go through what you're going to be speaking about in terms of the overall aim and the objectives that you want to achieve in the presentation, and just ask your audience for their agreement or their approval or their buy-in, so you can get them on side and they will be more committed to achieving these objectives and the overall aim. Now, let's go through these individually then. As I said, you probably have come across these before, but I'm using slightly different words here because it's the context of a presentation. Now, S is usually specific, and indeed for your presentation it's also specific. We need any individual objectives for the presentation to be absolutely specific, absolutely pointed. And that's because they also need to be measurable. You've probably heard the old saying, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so therefore, objectives need to be measurable. They need to be quantifiable. You need to know when they've been achieved. And so what I tend to do is think about it in terms of watching or listening to a participant achieving an objective. So for instance, if the objective was to list the 5 most important selling points of this new product, then in my mind I'm thinking, as I'm framing the objective, I'm thinking about participants actually telling me what those 5 most important points are. You get the idea, I'm sure. So that's the measurable part. Then we come to the A of the SMART acronym, and A here is standing for agreed. So in the world of management by objectives, very often the A is for achievable. Nothing wrong with that, but in the context of a presentation, I think it's absolutely crucial that your objectives are agreed, or maybe even accepted is another word that you could use, agreed or accepted, and so the audience are bought in to achieving those objectives with you. Very important to do that. Now, the R is very often realistic in other people's definitions of SMART objectives, but for our purposes, I like to use relevant. And relevant actually has 3 dimensions. Number 1, there's the relevance of the actual material for your audience. Is what you're going to be going through relevant for them? That's an important question to be asking. Also, if there is any type of technical content in the presentation, is it at the relevant level? Do the audience already have the knowledge they need if you're going to pitch in a quite detailed presentation? If not, maybe you need to equip them with some of that knowledge, or maybe actually you need to bring up the technical level to a simpler level to allow more people to understand it. So think about the relevance of your material, but then the relevance of the level of your material as well. And then the third dimension of relevance is the timing of your presentation, because it's key that you give the presentation at the most appropriate timing. Let me give you a wild example to demonstrate how this could all go to pieces. Let's imagine you've been asked to introduce a new product to your colleagues in a presentation, and your colleagues are support people that are going to have to get familiar with this product. And so you construct a presentation, you go through agreeing the overall aim and objectives. Then you come to deliver the presentation, and you're just 5 minutes in when one of your audience points out that actually this product has been delayed in terms of its introduction by 6 months, and so nothing's going to be happening about it, and it may be modified actually within that 6 months, so be different to what you're talking about. That would then make the relevance in terms of the timing and maybe even the subject matter of your presentation, well, it would cast doubts on it very seriously, wouldn't it? So make sure you've got the right type of material, the right technical level of material, and you're delivering the presentation at the right time to ensure relevance of your objectives. And then last one here is time bound. So that's when the objective is going to be achieved. Now, very often it's wrapped up within the presentation itself. So it might be by the end of the session, participants will be able to describe the top 5 features of this new product, or whatever it might be. It may be beyond the presentation. You may have a broader objective, like reducing the number of tech support calls that your company gets on their support hotline, or whatever. But you do need some kind of time-bound part of the objective, some framing, so we know when it's going to be achieved if we're going to be successful. So once again, specific, measurable, agreed or accepted, relevant, and time-bound. These are smart objectives in the context of presentations. As I said at the beginning, you don't always need to get to this level of detail. It might be that just an overall aim is good enough. However, whatever you've got, as long as you've circulated it with the sponsor and the audience, maybe for the audience at the very beginning of the presentation, and there's agreement, then when you get to the end of the presentation, you can use the same things that you said to check whether you actually achieved these things, whether the objectives have been achieved, or if it's just an overall aim, whether that has been achieved as well. So there's some thoughts for you on specifically showing the outcome of a presentation ahead of actually doing it, so that you can agree it, so that you can measure it, so that you can check it. Well, it's been great talking to you about these SMART objectives. It's always great to go into a little bit of detail in these individual nooks and crannies of presentation skills, but the greatest thing will be when you put them into practice yourself and reap the rewards of being a geek that can speak. Thank you very much, and see you next time around.